Shalom Aleichem. We're exploring Likutei Sichos, volume 27, the second Sicha of Shemini. The discussion is the debate, the argument, if you will, between Moshe and Aaron on the day of the temple's inauguration, whether or not the sacrificial meat should be eaten or not, even though they were then in a state of onain, of mourning, even more than mourning, of mourning that is on the day of the loss of a loved one, because on that day, Aaron's two sons died. And the issue becomes, both Aaron and his two remaining sons, are now in a state of onain, very strong period of mourning, the day of the death, and the rule is an onain cannot eat sacrificial meat, holy meat. However, Hashem made an exception, and he said, no, today's inauguration of the temple, it trumps everything. The language is that you have it as a take away the corpse from the place of the bride. We're dealing with a bride, we're dealing with inauguration of the temple, the great Simcha. The Jews will cry on their behalf. They need to continue their service, and life goes on. And even though they're in a state of onain, they should eat the meat, which was a huge exception. They were expected to ride above their personal grief and celebrate the inauguration of the temple. This was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the Shekhinah coming down, the first day of temple service ever in history. Huge day. They had a personal loss. Aaron was greatly rewarded that he accepted it, but you got to keep doing the service. And yes, even though you're owning, you eat the sacrifices. However, the subject of debate between Moshe and Aaron became about one particular sacrifice. There were three sacrifices that required eating. Three sin offerings. One was the goat of inauguration, which was brought that day as part of Aaron's litany of offerings to atone for the people. One is the goat Seir Nachshon. He was the first of the 12 Nisim, of the 12 leaders of the tribe, to bring inauguration offerings to the temple. And this was day one, so that was his offering. And among those offerings, there was a sin offering. And the third was Seir Chodesh, the sin offering of a goat, which is brought every Rosh Chodesh. This being the first Rosh Chodesh, but it will continue to be brought every Rosh Chodesh, hence for the next 1,200 years, etc. And the eating of the meat related to the sin offering is very important because it can only be eaten by a Kohen, and that's how the sin offering takes hold. By them eating it, the sin is atoned for. So this was like part of the holy service. And again, Moshe gave clear instructions from Hashem that it should be eaten. Life goes on, the show goes on. However, he found out that Aaron actually ate the first two, but he burnt the third one, the Rosh Chodesh offering. And Aaron defended burning this offering, Rosh Chodesh goat. Even though Hashem commanded to eat the other two in a state of onain, you cannot compare Shah to Doros. Those are the two terms. Kadshe Shah to Kadshe Doros. Translation: Shah means one-time offerings, things that happen one time for the special occasion of the inauguration of the temple. And Kadshe Doros offerings is all-time offerings that will be brought into the future. So Aaron's logic was this. Yes, Hashem gave a special clause that we're going to override the state of onain, of mourning, and they should eat it because of the special occasion. But that should only apply to the offerings that are part of the special occasion, which is the first two. They're Shah. They're on a clock. They're Shah. They're the time. They're special. They're time sensitive. But Doros, the Rosh Chodesh offering, is going to be brought every Rosh Chodesh moving on for the next 1,200 years. That shouldn't be part of the special exemption and the special law that overrides the state of onain. The fact is that they are in a state of mourning, a state of onain. This offering, it doesn't override it because it's not part of the inauguration. This was Aaron's thinking. It's Doros. Moshe argued, what do you mean? Hashem said that today nothing applies. You're bigger than this. Everything has to be eaten. But Aaron made this argument that you can't compare Shah, the one-time things, to Doros, that which will be consistent all-time offerings. And Moshe, when he heard the argument, he agreed with Aaron. Says the Rebbe that we find this conversation, the way it's in the Talmud, in the Shas, let's call it from the halachic perspective, and the way it's described in Rashi, the way, let's call it from the pshat, from the narrative, from the Torah, and we find a striking difference. Starting with the Rashi. Rashi says straightforward, if the leniency was taught by Shah, by one-time offerings, you cannot be lenient by Doros, by that which will be consistent for all generations. You can't. It's a special leniency that you have to, you only notice leniency because Hashem told you so. Hashem said it by Shah, not by Doros. How could you apply it? But in the Shas, it's not put so straightforwardly. In the Shas, Aaron said to Moshe, you want me to eat Doros? You want me to eat regular all-time offerings? How could I? It's a holy offering, and I'm an Onen. And an Onen cannot eat holy food. And I'll prove it to you that an Onen can't eat holy food. He cannot even eat Meiser Sheni. Meiser Sheni is the second tithe, which is a level of holiness a lot less than a sacrifice. You can eat it in the entire city of Jerusalem, as a for instance, whereas the sacrifices have to be eaten in the walls of the temple. Meiser Sheni is holy, but you can't compare it to the holiness of the sacrifices. And therefore, we know that Meiser Sheni cannot be eaten in a state of Onen. It's written explicitly in the Torah later on, and clearly they knew the laws. Certainly, I cannot eat the sacrifice. So there never questions the difference between Rashi and the Shas, but specifically the language of the Shas. Does Moshe need Aaron to teach him a lesson that you cannot eat holy sacrifice food in a state of Onen? They knew that. That was a given. That was a given. The exception was that in this case, we were going to override it. But Moshe knew the law. The law is basic. Aaron's bringing him back to Cheder. He's telling him basics. Moshe, listen up. An Onen cannot eat meat. The proof is because of the Kal Vachomer, the deduction that we learned this law from Meiser Sheni. He can't even eat meat, so for sure he can't eat it in the state of Onen. So for sure they cannot eat the meat in Onen. What does he have to teach him the basic law? Did they not know that law? He should have simply said the way Rashi puts it. We know the leniency by Shah. We don't know it by Doris. Why does the Talmud not say it so simple? Why does Aaron have to go back to the drawing board and teach Moshe the basic concept of why an Onen is proscribed from eating holy foods? This is a question that bothers the Rebbe. It should bother everybody, but it really bothers the Rebbe because the Talmud is being wordy, and the Talmud is getting very involved in the limudim and how we derive it when that's not the place for it. We're not trying to prove the basic law. We're trying to prove why it doesn't have the exception to that basic law. The basic law was a given. So it's very strange, especially when Rashi puts it very straightforward. Says the Rebbe that the explanation is going to be because Rashi differs from the Shas. It's not that Rashi argues with the Gemara, but the Pshat level, the way you study this on a text level, which is the Rashi way, versus the halachic approach, would be very different in the way they view this whole conversation. And what is the conversation? Which is stricter? Which should be stricter logically? Shah or Davis? One-time things or ongoing things? Which is an interesting conversation in Judaism in general. What should hold more weight? That which happens one time, once in a lifetime, once a year, or that which you do every day? And we find arguments in both directions. One might say something that happens every day. We know the principle. Tadir v'she'ena, tadir kedem. That which you do on a regular basis and that which you do less. The regular basis overrides it and comes first. For example, there's such a concept. On the other hand, there's a concept that something that happens once a year or once in a lifetime is of prominence and great importance, and that should override. So there's two ways to look at it. Says the Rebbe, I'm going to show you how Rashi and from the Pshat level of Torah study holds that Doris is more strict, and the Shas, the halachic level, is that Shah is more strict. Again, let's start with Rashi. Rashi, we know that Doris, Rashi maintains that Doris, that which happens on a regular, consistent basis, is more strict. How do I know Rashi holds that opinion? That the Rashi holds that is the opinion in the Pshat level of Torah study. He says as much. What does Rashi say? If you're lenient with Shah, you can't be lenient with Doris. Because Doris is not as lenient as Shah. It's more strict. So Rashi makes it very plain, the position. The Talmud doesn't say that. It says that you know why? Because the Talmud holds that Shah is actually more strict. A one-time thing is more strict and holds more weight. So he couldn't say what Rashi says. And therefore he comes up with this And the Rebbe parenthetically, I guess, sort of parenthetically, shows us where he brings that proof. He shows you that the Talmud says that. It's in another tractate, the tractate of Pesachim, but it happens to be on this same very discussion. And in the Talmud, there's a discussion how we know that if a sin offering, which is supposed to be brought outside the temple, it's brought on the altar outside, which normally everything stays outside. It's called chatas chitzona. It's an external sin offering, which is most sin offerings. And where is it? The blood sprinkled on the outside altar. It doesn't come into the temple. However, there are very holy sacrifices that on Yom Kippur, for example, where the blood is sprinkled on the inside, and that's an exception of exceptions. But normal offerings are called chatas chitzona. It's an external sin offering. If that blood is brought in, it's disqualified. That's the halacha. If some Kohen by accident he accepted the blood over there by the outside altar, and he didn't realize that it's an outside offering. It should have been sprinkled on the altar outside, and instead he brought it into the temple, into the Mishkan, etc. It's been disqualified. Where does he learn the law from? This is in the Gemara in Pesachim. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says we learn it from our section here, where Moshe heard that this offering was burnt. He asked, why was it burnt? And his first question is, this is in the text explicitly. The blood wasn't brought inside, which would mean that had it been brought inside, that would have disqualified. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, from here we learn, if blood is brought inside by an outside offering, it's disqualified. The sages, with the majority opinion with which the halacha goes, don't agree with that limud, with that learning. They say no, you can't derive it from there. They give another derivation, which the Rebbe does not quote, because it's not really relevant to us. But why don't they accept Rabbi Yossi Aglili's thing that you learn it from this discussion, from the disqualification that's explicit right here, that Moshe said, had they brought the blood inside, it would have become disqualified? And the answer is, the sages say, what do you mean? That was Shah. That was a special occasion. How could you derive from that for the Doros, for the normal laws? At a special occasion, the Torah gives a ruling. Moshe says that had they brought the blood in, it would have disqualified it. But how do you know that stringency applies also to regular day-to-day offerings? That they too have this law that if they are brought in, they're disqualified? You have no way to derive it. You can't derive Dorot from Shah because Shah is stricter. So the Rebbe has shown us a clear place in the Shas, that the majority and the halachic opinion of the Shas is Shah is stricter. So this is a brilliant innovation of the Rebbe. Now we understand why the Talmud has to go through hoops for Aaron to make his case. He can't just say like Rashi, that Doros is stricter and therefore you cannot derive the leniency of eating the food in a state of One by Doros from Shah, because Doros is actually more strict. However, the Talmud holds that Shah is stricter. And if Shah, they were allowed to eat the meat, the argument would have been that Doros definitely should eat the meat. So you can't use this logical thinking. Rather, according to the Talmud, Aaron's argument was not a logical one. It was a halachic one. Hashem told us the rule in one case as an exception. But the normal rule of thumb still remains that an onen cannot eat holy foods. So the way I understand this, yes, he is going back to basics. He's saying an onen can't eat meat. Because even he can't even eat Ma'aser Sheni. So Aaron is emphasizing, in the Talmudic way of thinking, is emphasizing the basic law stands. There might be an exception of Kodesh Shah, the special one-time things, but the rule of thumb still remains that anything that's not included in that, how could you compare it? We don't know. Hashem said it only by that case. He didn't say by other cases. What should be done by other cases? You stick with the rule of thumb. What's the rule of thumb? An onen cannot eat it. And we have a very strong proof to that. Because he can't even eat Ma'aser. He can't eat Ma'aser. Certainly can't eat holy foods. The fact that there's an exception by Kodesh Shah, that's a one-off. So to sum it up, in the Rashi column, Doros is more strict, and therefore Aaron's case is a very simple logical deduction. The Torah made a leniency that an onen can eat the meat by Shah, by the one-time ones. You cannot derive it for the doros by the all-time offerings. You can't, because doros is stricter. Whereas in the Shas, where Shah is more strict, if you went with the logical thinking, Aaron wouldn't have this argument. Shah is more strict. Hashem made a leniency you can eat. For sure you can eat doros. Therefore, Aaron didn't go with the logical. It's not about logic. The principal law is that only cannot eat holy food. He can't even eat Ma'aser Sheni, for crying out loud. The principle stands. Hashem made an exceptional override when it comes to the one-time offerings of the inauguration of the temple, period. But you can't apply, you can't start applying it. Not because it's lighter or harder, just because it's a different law. And you can't start making exceptions unless the place where Hashem gave you that explicit exception. So this is already brilliant how the Rebbe precisely and with great precision shows you the different wording of Rashi and the Shas and proves it, because they have the different position about what is more strict, Shah or Doros, one time or all time. But then the Rebbe is not satisfied. The Rebbe, with his signature style, he said, but what's the reason for the thinking? Why would the Shas be of the opinion that Shah is more strict and Rashi the opinion that Doros are more strict? I mean, you could just say it, and we've proven it from the language of Rashi and from the discussion of the Shas in the tractate of Pesachim, but there has to be a logic. Comes along the Rebbe, and he says, I'll explain to you. When you talk about the word Shah, something that happened as a one-time special mitzvah, special offering, should it be stricter or lighter in terms of its laws than the regular laws of the temple? So the Rebbe says there are two definitions of Kodesh Shah, of one time. There's one definition which would make it much lighter, and there's a different definition which would make it stricter. Normally, when there's a special one-time occasion, there's an exception. It's very light, it's very lenient. If something happens only once, as a special exception, you might say that all the basic laws go to the wayside. And the example the Rebbe gives is the famous story of Eliyahu Bahar HaKarmel, when Eliyahu Hanavi brought the offering outside the temple as a special exception, and he had special permission from above, what have you. And they didn't have any of the rules of the temple. It was a total exception. And therefore, it's exceptional. It has no laws, no stringencies. Yeah, as a special one-off, that would be lighter. That would be the logic. Something that happens once. Eliyahu brought an offering outside the temple. Well, you're not allowed to. This is after it became prohibited to bring offerings outside the temple, etc., etc. And he did it because he had special instructions. As a one-time thing, he didn't make this the law. A special instruction, it breaks all the rules. It's lighter, more lenient. Then the Rebbe says, conversely, there are offerings or things in Yiddishkeit that are brought that happen once that are actually more strict. Namely, if these things are part of an inauguration process, and they will set the stage for all of future history. So yeah, they happen once, but their impact reverberates for all time. And here they become much stricter than things that are done on a daily basis. Are you kidding? They set the tone for all of history. You could say when you're giving an education to your child, the education really, really matters because this is how they're going to be raised for all time. And therefore, the chinuch, which is the same word used, the chinuch education and chinuch for inauguration of the temple, this is usually important. So they're differentiated with the same term, Kodesh Shah, a one-time offerings, one-time service, what have you. At times it can be looked at as lenient. If it's just a one-off, it happened once, it's an exception. We're not so worried about the rules. You know, we were in yeshiva, the teacher was very strict. But on the one day of Lag BaOmer or whatever, we went out to the park, it was a one day, it was much more lenient. Because you could afford to do that. As we gave before the example of Eliyahu Bahar HaKarmel, Elijah bringing the offering on the Mount of Carmel, it was an exception. It's lenient, it doesn't carry all the restrictions. But if it's a one-time thing, but this one-time thing is happening at the beginning of the process, which will influence all time, are you kidding? This has to be tremendously strictly observed. It will impact everything that happens later. Says the Rebbe, that will explain the difference between the way the Shas looks at the eating of the offerings by the Kohanes and the way Rashi does. Clearly, the offerings that were brought here were of the stricter variation, stricter variety of Shah. This is the inauguration of the temple. Are you kidding? This is how we're setting up the whole future generation for the next 1,200 years and also for the third Beis HaMikdash. They were usually important. Says the Rebbe, yeah, but we're not talking about the actual offerings. We're talking about one detail, the eating of the offerings. The eating of the offerings is very nice. It's part of the service. But is that something that really maintains its impact for all future time? Is that pivotal to the service of inauguration? Or is that a sideshow? Says that would be the difference between Rashi, between the Pshat approach and the Halachic approach. From the Pshat approach, the purpose of these offerings, read the verse. The offerings were brought, so Hashem should come down. The Shekhinah did come down. The offerings had not been eaten yet. The Shekhinah and the fire came down the minute they were brought. So from the Pshat level, on that level, the pivotal moment is over. The fact that the Kohen is supposed to eat it, that's a side detail. And here now that the eating of the offering will go into the category of Shah, of one-time offerings, that is much more lenient than that which is part of the regular service. It's not part of the regular service. It's a one-off. Yeah, go eat. But not that this is pivotal for all time. It's a special one-time celebration. Go eat. That which is pivotal has already been accomplished before the Kohen started eating anything. That's how you would read it from the narrative level, from the Rashi, from the verses itself. However, on the halachic level, we know the principle that when does the sin offering take hold? When the Kohen eats it. So on a halachic level, on a Shas level, on a Gemara Talmudic level, the eating is pivotal to the service. And being that this service was pivotal, it was a one-time offering, that it's a foundation for all future generations. Are you kidding? This eating takes on a great strictness. And therefore the Shas would hold that Shah is stricter. Extraordinary. And then the Rebbe says this bears itself out further in a nuanced difference between the way Moshe responded, the way it's described in the Talmud and the way it's described in Rashi. In the Talmud, the language is, Moshe admitted, and he wasn't embarrassed to say that I never heard this, but he rather said, I heard and I forgot. Meaning, he wasn't embarrassed, in which case he would have said, I never heard this. Okay, you're right, but I never heard. No, I heard and I forgot. For whatever reason, Moshe was meant to forget this law. Whereas in Rashi, the accepted version of the Rashi is, Moshe admitted that he was, and he wasn't embarrassed to say, I never heard this. So the Rebbe, this is Teirase Shel Mashiach, this is Gilead, of course, where everything is so perfect. This little nuance. Says the Rebbe, remember what we said. Rashi says that Aaron's argument was a logical one. How could you be lenient here? Just because you're lenient here. Doris is more strict than Shah. It's a logical argument. In a logical argument, no one says, oh, I forgot. It doesn't make sense to say I forgot. Logic is not something that you forget. You can make a mistake in logic. But the word forget is applicable when you heard a law. And therefore, you can't say I forgot. Rather, he said, Rashi admits that. Rashi's source nominally is going to be the Shas and the classic sources. And yet Rashi cuts it short. Because on the Rashi level, this was a logical argument, and a logical argument, you'd say, I never heard it. Okay, but you're right. I never heard it. Maybe I never thought of it. But you don't use the word forgetting. Whereas in the Talmud, where this is not logic, this is about information. This is about did or did not Hashem include this exception in the exception? And Aaron argued that that's the case. But Moshe said, yeah, I forgot. Hashem did say that. He has to say, I forget. This is, first of all, it makes sense to forget information as opposed to logic. But also, yeah, Moshe was now reminded that that's really what Hashem said, because if not, how do you know that Aaron's right? Doesn't say this explicitly, but I think that's self-understood. How do you know that Aaron is right? If we're talking not about a logical argument, you're talking about whether or not Hashem said this information. And Aaron says, how could you say this without Hashem saying it? And Moshe said, you're right. Hashem told me that this is going to be an exception. And it doesn't apply to Kachik Doros even on the same day. And I forgot. So therefore, you're right. The Rebbe takes out a lesson. Basically going with the column of the Shas, that Kachik Shah is stricter than Kachik Datis, that which is done for the moment, the time sensitive, if you will, the one-time thing, is stricter and overrides that which is done regularly. The Rebbe takes out a lesson that in all of Yiddishkeit we have to be careful and strict. However, when it comes to things that are taught to us by tzaddikim, by the Rabbi, that are time sensitive, that are now, they need extra strength, because sometimes the Yetzer Hara says, who says it's so important? It's a new thing. The Rebbe uses the example of the campaign of the Frierdiker Rebbe, which the Rebbe continued and enlarged, that we are on the cusp of Mashiach, and we have to prepare ourselves, and the whole service has to be in the spirit of Mashiach. It's a new concept that the Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, and then the Rebbe brought home and said, this is the job of our generation. This is Kachik Shah. This is for the moment. Kachik Shah needs to be taken more strict. That will be the Shas lesson. Kachik Shah needs to be taken more seriously. And why so? Because human nature is to say, yeah, that's nice, that's a new campaign. But that which Judaism has been teaching for thousands of years, that's basic, that's staple Yiddishkeit. This is something new, yeah, we'll deal with it later. No, on the contrary. We have to know that which the Rabbeim, the Nevi'im, the Nesiim revealed to us, this becomes a Yiddishkeit, and because that is new and therefore might be taken less strictly, we need to overemphasize.